Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Turkey and Azerbaijan have accused Armenia of committing war crimes in fighting over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. This comes after 13 people were killed and more than 40 wounded in the Armenian shelling on the city of Ganja. The two countries vowed to hold Armenia accountable for its actions. In occupied Kashmir, Indian troops have martyred another Kashmiri during a military raid in the Islamabad district. This brings the death toll from violence by Indian forces to 11 in the last 10 days. The region has been under a curfew and communications blackout since India revoked its special status last year. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's Labour Party has won a landslide victory in New Zealand's general election. The Electoral Commission says the Labour Party has won 49% of the vote, ahead of the National Party's 27%. Ardern is projected to win a rare outright parliamentary majority. India has recorded 837 COVID-19 deaths and over 62,000 infections overnight as the country's caseload approaches 7.5 million. Brazil has registered 754 deaths since yesterday, with the toll crossing 153,000. In Pakistan, 13 people died from the virus overnight, taking the death count to 6,638. Globally, coronavirus has claimed over 1.1 million lives and infected over 39 million people so far. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Turkey and Azerbaijan have accused Armenia of committing war crimes in fighting over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. This comes after 13 people were killed and more than 40 wounded in the Armenian shelling on the city of Ganja. Nearly 600 people have been killed in the conflict since it broke out on the 27th of September. The two countries vowed to hold Armenia accountable for its atrocities. Earlier, Azerbaijan said it has liberated Fuzuli city in Karabakh region from the Armenian occupation. Indian troops have martyred another civilian in occupied Jammu and Kashmir's Islamabad district. The occupying troops targeted the youth during a cordon and search operation in Larno area of the district. The military crackdown in the area is still underway. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Office strongly condemned India's aggression against civilians in the occupied valley. In a press briefing, spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said Indian forces have martyred more than 300 Kashmiris in a year. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 439 days. India's major political party, Congress, has called for the restoration of occupied Jammu and Kashmir's special status. In a tweet, former Home Minister Palaniappan Chidambaram said the arbitrary and unconstitutional decisions of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government must be rescinded. Details about India's unconstitutional actions in this report.
The occupied valley's plight started on 26th of October 1947. When India claimed to have signed instrument of accession on that day with the Maharaja of Kashmir. Professor Christopher Snedden writes, large parts of the valley had declared independence from Hari Singh's oppressive rule. Snedden says Singh had no legal capacity under international law to sign the document, as he had lost effective control of the state in the presence of an outstanding standstill agreement between Pakistan and Singh. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office and US State Department also affirmed the instrument could not come into effect. The United Nations does not consider Indian claims as valid and recognizes Kashmir as a disputed territory. United Nations Security Council resolutions categorically denounce the permanent accession of the valley via the instrument. It conditions the future political status of the valley on the outcome of free, fair and impartial plebiscite. Last year, on 5th August, New Delhi revoked Article 370. The article allowed the state of Muslim majority a certain amount of autonomy, its own constitution, separate flag and freedom to make laws. According to the Indian Constitution, Article 370 could only be modified with the agreement of the state government. The Modi government's illegal decision aggravated the situation in the occupied territory ever since Jammu and Kashmir has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout.
For more on this, we are joined by legal expert on Kashmir, Asad Rahim Khan. So thank you very much for your time at Indus News. First of all, India's main opposition party, Congress, has asked Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government to restore Article 370 and give Kashmiris their rights. How do you think New Delhi will respond to this demand?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think the first thing to see is the constituency that this government caters to. This is not either a rational government or a regular government. Ever since Narendra Modi was swept apart in 2014 and then re-elected with an even larger mandate in 2019, it is very distressing to see them cater to what is the most far-right elements of their constituency. It is something that is Hindutva-centric, something that is authoritarian, nationalist, patriarchal, and as you can probably see, something that does prize the illegal, unconstitutional annexation of a territory over the fundamental rights of its citizenry. Obviously, Pakistan's position does not see this as either India's territory or this as India's citizen. But to come back to your question, I don't see this government, which is an incredibly populist government, and having seen the reaction to the revocation of Article 370, which has actually enhanced Narendra Modi's popularity in far-right or rather extremist nationalist circles, that they would actually back down because Congress has told them so. I think it must be remembered that it is Congress that created the original sin of occupation in Kashmir. So all things in context.
So, Mr. Khan, since the revocation of Article 370, the Indian government has detained most of the Kashmiri leadership. So, on what legal basis New Delhi can confine them indefinitely?
Well, I think Kashmir itself, or occupied Kashmir itself, is already a complete horror house of special laws that are neither rooted in India's common jurisprudence nor in India's constitution. And now they are extrapolating that. The sentence that I hope that Kashmir can become the rest of India is now being met with India is slowly but surely becoming the rest of Kashmir. So short answer to your question, there is virtually no legal basis under which the Indian government can detain its Kashmiri leadership. Not only is it unconstitutional, it is also patently illegal. Having said that, though, what they are exhibiting or what they are demonstrating with their leaders is something that the Kashmiri citizen has been all too well acquainted with. And we have seen, again, a horror house of such laws in which they neither have the right to liberty nor very basic fundamental freedoms, both in terms of the length of their detention, the torture they undergo by the Indian security forces, and the threadbare reasoning with which they are eventually detained. So there is virtually no legal basis that New Delhi can continue to confine these leaders without actual cause.
Thank you, Mr. Asad Rahim Khan, for talking to Indus News. Really appreciate that. And to talk more on this, we are joined by Haseeb Qazi, a political analyst. Thank you, sir, very much for your time at Indus News. First of all, Indian brutalities have intensified in occupied Kashmir, especially after the revocation of Article 370. So what does New Delhi want to achieve with this violence?
Well, it's clear to the world that Pakistan always saw Article 370 as a red herring, And I think now the world agrees that Pakistan's stance on Article 370 being a red herring is correct. See, we have recently seen that as latest as 28th August 2020, India was using pellet guns on peaceful religious processions, which resulted in a lot of people being wounded and blinded. So I think the world is clearly watching how India's response to revoking Article 370 has been. Kashmiris have clearly not accepted this, and they want the UN resolutions to be enforced in letter and spirit. And that has exactly been the stance of Pakistan as well throughout. Now, what India wants to achieve, I cannot say, but clearly the world is watching India emerging as a fascist and a rogue state. It's increasingly being seen as a violator of international law and human rights. I think Pakistani Prime Minister's analogy of the Modi government akin to the Nazi regime is I think very well founded. And I think the world is agreeing more and more with each passing day that India is a violator of international law and human rights, particularly with regards to the people of Kashmir. And I think one thing that it's really important to note here, that Pakistan's election to the Human Rights Council, recently re-election to the Human Rights Council, I think that is, again, a wonderful opportunity for Pakistan to raise these issues in the Human Rights Council. And I think, yes, despite the Indian aggression on Kashmiris, Pakistan is also committed to the people of Kashmir and the cause of Kashmir. And it will be, these issues will be raised at the international forums.
Mr. Qazi, the disgruntled political parties in the occupied valley have joined hands to put up a joint front against New Delhi. How do you think India will respond to this stronger alliance after revoking Article 370?
So it's really important to see who these people are who have formed the alliance. These people include Mehbooba Mufti and Farooq Abdullah. These are former chief ministers of the Indian occupied Kashmir. And these people are known to have strong roots in New Delhi. And now these are the people who are voicing their concerns against the revocation of Article 370, which is, again, a violation of the UN resolutions. So the alliance needs to be seen in a context. See, we have seen that freedom fighters like Burhan Wani, who have been praised by Pakistan and acknowledged as freedom fighters for Kashmir, they've always been labeled by India as terrorists. But today, people who are raising voices against New Delhi are not are their own people. Mehbooba Mufti and people like Farooq Abdullah, who have been in power in Kashmir. So clearly, this is not going down well for New Delhi. And I think it doesn't come as a surprise that increasingly this will go towards a plebiscite, and the people of Kashmir are not going to take these measures very lightly. And I think another thing that needs to be seen is that India's its recognition as the recognition of Indian state's high-handedness can also be seen from the fact that international organizations such as Amnesty International have halted their operations in India on account of the state's high-handedness with these international organizations. So I think things are not going well. I think this clearly wasn't thought out, and Pakistan's narrative on this issue that UN resolutions should be complied with, they are more and more, they're being more pronounced now.
Mr. Asif Qazi, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. Really appreciate that. It's time for a short break. I will be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The European Union has imposed targeted restrictive measures on 7 recently appointed ministers in Syria. In a statement, the European Council said the curbs were imposed over violent repression against Syria's civil population. It said the sanctions will include a travel ban on ministers and freeze their assets as well. The statement said the recent move, 280 people have become subjected to EU sanctions. It said EU remains committed to finding a lasting political solution to the Syrian conflict under international law. The Council keeps developments in the Syrian conflict under constant review. Any decision to prolong the sanctions is for the Council to take on in an annual basis. Israel has stopped issuing visas to United Nations human rights workers in Palestine. This forced 9 employees of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to leave Israel and the occupied territories. In February, Israel suspended its ties with the UN agency after it unveiled a list of companies working in illegal settlements in the West Bank. Human Rights Watch says such steps are part of a strategy to muzzle documentations of Israel's repression of Palestinians. The rights group said Israel has failed in its goal of silencing criticism as activists are working as strongly as before. Israel also banned a Palestinian pop star from returning home after he released a video calling for resistance against Tel Aviv. A U.S. delegation led by Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will travel to Israel, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. The visit comes in support of recently signed normalization deals between Israel and 2 other Arab countries. In a statement, the Treasury Department said the 3-day visit is aimed at supporting expanded economic cooperation. It added the delegation will join Israeli officials on the first ever direct commercial flight from Israel to Bahrain. The statement read the group will then fly to Abu Dhabi, where the first ever Abraham Accords Business Summit will be held. The Treasury Department said the U.S. and Israeli delegation will then fly back to Tel Aviv. Yemen's warring parties have exchanged hundreds more prisoners under a deal struck in Switzerland last month. Planes took off from Yemeni airports on the second and final day of an operation to fly about 1,000 men home. Welcoming the release, the International Committee of the Red Cross said over 1,000 prisoners were returned home. It said 352 prisoners were exchanged today after more than 700 were swapped yesterday. The warring sides had agreed in 2018 to swap 15,000 detainees split between both the sides to pave the way for the political negotiations. Yemen has been at war since the Houthi rebels ousted the government from power in Sana'a in late 2014. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Ankara will never recognize the annexation of Crimea. He says Turkey supports Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity and political unity. In a joint news conference with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Ankara, Erdogan said ties with Kiev can be enhanced in many fields through a win-win approach. He said Turkey sees Ukraine as an important country to establish peace and security in the region. Erdogan said the 2 sides are committed to make free trade deals and boost bilateral trade volume to $10 billion. Zelensky said Turkey and Ukraine have signed an MOU on technical and military cooperation. He stressed Kiev is ready to further enhance the strategic partnership with Ankara. The United States rejects Russia's proposal for 1-year unconditional extension of the New START arms control treaty. U.S. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said Washington can't accept the proposal with Russia not freezing nuclear warheads. In a series of tweets, he said the United States hopes Russia will re-evaluate its position before a costly arms race ensues. Earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the treaty must be extended without conditions before it is too late.
It would be very regrettable if the treaty disappeared and was not replaced by another similar fundamental document. In the past, the New START treaty worked. It worked well, fulfilling its fundamental role as a constraint, curbing the arms race and controlling weapons. It's clear we have new weapon systems that the Americans don't have. For the moment, in any case, we're open to discuss this issue as well.
India has recorded 837 COVID-19 deaths and over 62,000 infections overnight as the country's case load topped 7.4 million. Brazil has registered 754 deaths since yesterday, with the toll crossing 153,000. Globally, coronavirus has claimed over 1.1 million lives and infected over 39 million people so far. More in this report.
The second wave of COVID-19 continues to exert pressure on Europe. Germany, Greece and Slovenia set new records of infections just a day after Italy, Portugal and Lithuania hit their single-day highs. The governments continue to impose stricter restrictions across the continent to contain the virus. In Belgium, hospitals risk running out of beds as infections soar and the country imposes new curbs.
Restaurants and cafes will have to close for a period of 1 month. There will be an evaluation in 2 weeks, and there will also be a large-scale support package to help cafes and restaurants to help them through this clearly very difficult time. The sale of alcohol will be prohibited after 8 p.m. There will be a curfew between midnight and 5 a.m.
Only 5 countries, including Brazil, Argentina and Mexico, account for 80% of the Latin America's COVID-19 infections. The pandemic has not only devastated the region's economies, but also put a huge strain on its social and cultural lives. Mexico's indigenous people face uncertainties as COVID-19 stems the annual tradition of visiting cemeteries on the Day of Dead.
Right now we planted 50% of what we plant every year because we have suffered because of the plants that we've been left with that we had to throw out. There have been many losses this year.
The situation in India remains grim as the country continues to witness world's highest number of daily deaths. Meanwhile, the Chinese mainland reported 13 new imported cases in the past 24 hours.
In Pakistan, 13 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 during the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the countrywide death toll has risen to 6,638. The ministry says 641 people tested positive overnight. It said there are 9,174 active COVID-19 cases in the country. The ministry added out of nearly 322,000 cases, over 306,000 have recovered so far. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's Labour Party has won a landslide victory in New Zealand's general election. Electoral Commission results show Labour Party have secured 49% of the votes, while the opposition National Party got 27% of the ballots. It says Labour Party is on track to win 64 of the 120 seats in the country's unicameral parliament. It will be the highest seats won by any party since New Zealand adopted a proportional voting system in 1996. Ardern came out of her home in Auckland to celebrate her victory with her supporters. Opposition National Party leader Judith Collins congratulated Ardern on an outstanding result. New Zealanders have also voted on referendums to legalize euthanasia and recreational marijuana. The result of the referendum will be announced on the 30th of October. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For further updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.